Hello, someone just joined us.
Hi, this is Kim Gomez. How are you?
Hi, Kim. Well, we were just sitting here chatting about the Adult Literacy X Prize and the community's competition. So whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
I would like to start by talking about the work we've done, and then I'd really like to go forward with questions from people. Would that work for everyone?
Works for me.
Okay, great. I'm Kimberly Gomez, and I'm a professor on faculty at UCLA in the School of Education and Information Studies in the Division of Urban Schooling. And I am someone who has worked for about the last 18 years at the intersection of STEM learning primarily and language acquisition and development. And this probably seems like an odd combination. I often have had people, look askance at why those two things come together. And I always respond with the idea that when people are learning mathematics, when they are learning science, they are reading and they are writing. They are not simply doing calculations and experiments. When people are doing social studies, they are more often than not engaged in some form of written communication as well as reading text. And the biggest challenge that is primarily faced amongst adolescent and adult readers and writers is the inability to be able to communicate as well as they would like to using reading and writing and even making arguments in discussion, an important and worthy task as well. So for the past 18 years, what I've tried to do is to understand how we can create strategic approaches, better curricular materials, more authentic assessments to be able to build in adolescent and adult learners a better and quicker, more efficient, and by quick I mean more efficient access to reading comprehension, writing, written communication, and oral discussion that in particular for the latter reflects their ability to be able to make claims and show evidence, communicate evidence for those claims. So that's the work I've been doing. Why does this matter for adults? It matters a lot. When I'm talking about adults here, I'm talking about people 16 years old and older who are either still in schooling or who are out of the traditional schooling, but maybe are in vocational ed and some other sort of environment that is requiring them, as well as the workplace, that's requiring them to communicate effectively to extract information from text and other materials. So when I'm talking about this population, I think that it is frequently a misunderstood and certainly a misconception, a misunderstood notion that there isn't that much reading and writing that takes place outside of schooling once people get out into the workforce, especially if they are not white collar workers. They can get by, they don't need that much reading and writing. In a course that I regularly teach called Literacy in Society, I disabused my undergrads of that notion by sending them out into the world, if you will, and asking them to identify all the literacy that is required for a particular position. So they will follow someone around for the day, maybe a building janitor, maybe a a teaching assistant, maybe a barista, and any number of other positions like that. I've had them follow someone who was a truck driver or someone who was a flea market vendor around all day long, and spend the day following this person, shadowing them, looking at the work they do, and trying to understand what the literacy is that's involved in these tasks. And they come back quite surprised, and as you might expect, undergrads often think that they can find an easy enough task to get through the assignment. So they might follow the truck driver or the palm tree trimmer, or the person who is a maid in a home. And they come back incredibly surprised at how much literacy is required, whether it's reading the homeowner's instructions about what needs to be done that day, or reading the tasks for the week that the building janitor is supposed to carry out. They obviously, the barista, there is a lot of literacy involved, and people are unable to retain their jobs, often even unable to get those jobs if they can't demonstrate an ability to be able to communicate at least at the basic level, and to comprehend the reading that is required of them. So I'm going to stop here for a minute and ask, are there any questions about that before I move to a brief discussion about the conspicuous strategies and presumptive literacies that are often in materials that we have available?
Hi, Kim. It's Monica from X Prize.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, in the literacy and society class, with some of the students that you do have follow some professionals around, is there any findings or any shocking findings or realizations they have after finishing those shadow days? That is something that can be implemented or taken forward in regards to workforce development and properly preparing some industries and some workers for those positions?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked that. One of the things that comes to mind is a young woman whose mother was a housekeeper and laundress in one of the fancy Santa Monica hotels right there by the ocean. The mother did not read or write very well in English, and frankly was not very literate in her first language, which was Spanish. Beyond, I mean, she spoke Spanish, but she came from a small village, had very little elementary education, and so she was not someone who had a lot of confidence in reading at all. So this woman had been hired quite a few years back when there weren't as many literacy demands being placed on the workers. But in the last few years, there had been more. So she had a practice of taking a picture of some new thing that had been placed on the bulletin board at work, and sending that by email, because she was fluent in being able to use email and text messaging. She would take a picture of it, send it to her daughter, and her daughter would translate it and then send the translation back to her. And that's how she was functioning, which is a grossly inefficient and sort of demoralizing way to have to function. You could imagine a world instead where if the building managers knew and cared, they could make sure that that something was not just in English or not just in Spanish, but there were also signs and other sorts of things that would kind of illustrate what the work was supposed to entail. You could imagine even more that there would be opportunities for on-site training of the workers so that they could. But my guess is that in places like that, there are a fairly prescribed set of tasks that are required that require some updates periodically. And that you could imagine posters, you could imagine those posters accompanying simple words and phrases, and of course illustrations that would help people be able to understand what's expected of them in the roles that they're engaged with. Those things, I've had students doing this sort of work now for at least 10 or 12 years, this particular assignment, and it doesn't happen. Those updates don't happen. The workplace remains an environment where the assignments that are posted on bulletin boards, the materials that are shared with the workers are typically written at somewhere around a 10th or 11th grade level, where the students, where the workers themselves, particularly in blue collar positions, may be reading at a 3rd or 4th grade level in terms of independent reading and writing. So there is both a lack of awareness and perhaps a lack of concern in this regard with what the workers are able to have access to in terms of the expectations and content. And it's just unfair, and it's just inefficient, because your worker can be a better worker if he or she understands what's expected and doesn't have to do a lot of workarounds with daughters and sons and other people who can help them.
Thank you.
Another, I mentioned conspicuous strategies and presumptive literacies. These are kind of education jargon, but in short, we coined these phrases after we began to realize that many of the materials that are written online for kids, for adolescents, and for adults are full of what we call presumptive literacies. A lot of times the kinds of things that are designed in terms of curricular materials, again, for children and adults, have assumptions about the literacy skills that are going to be present in the users, and the quickest solution that people often go to is trying to make sure that the reading levels are somewhere in the vicinity of what they believe their employees or the learners are going to be operating at. But the focus is often on vocabulary, and vocabulary is only one marker of the challenges that are faced when workers are trying, or anyone is trying to read materials. So for example, there might be compound sentences, there might be multi-clausal sentences, there might be, and we find this a lot, transition phrases, like on the other hand, by contrast to, and so forth, that signal a shift that is happening in the content, and at that shift that's happening in the argument. And for many readers and writers, especially those for whom English is not a first language, or for those who are who do not just simply have strong reading and writing skills, those transitions are completely, they go over their heads. They're completely not recognizing them in the text that's written. With respect to multi-clausal sentences that go on for maybe 2 or 3 lines, they may have very simple words, but having a multi-clausal sentence means that there are a lot of ideas that are packed into one sentence, and therefore there are a lot of ideas to try to recall and to try to do something with, to comprehend. Those are often places of kind of pitfalls for reading and writing for those who either don't have strong reading and writing skills, or again don't have English as a first language, and are trying to work with English as a second language. The other kinds of presumptions that you will find is that employers or instructors will do a workaround where they will use video. Video is a favorite go-to for many instructors who feel like, well, I can just tell them what this is about, and then they won't have to read anything. There are many problems with this workaround, but a couple of them are that in doing so, while it may be expedient, it may seem expedient, it's not preparing the person for the next set of things that they need to get content on, and the next one and the next one. The second thing is that in using video, they are also not they are often not stopping at different points to ensure that the person is understanding the content. So one of the workarounds that we've done in response to having teachers engage in half-hour-long videos or lecture videos is that we will ask them to stop about every few minutes at an important point and ask the learners to write what they think they've learned so far, or maybe respond to a one-sentence question where they are filling in the blank or doing a true false or something along that line. It is trying to build the skills as opposed to simply working around them, and thereby obfuscating the fact that people still are not being developed in terms of their literacy and language skills. In online materials as well, this is another place where the designers of materials seem to feel that they can kind of work around the literacy challenges because, well, okay, now we're doing a lot of online work. But the same kind of thing happens where language is being used, directions are being given, and there are no strategic, what we think of as conspicuous strategies. There are no strategic tools available for folks to be able to get access to the content that's online. And what do I mean by strategic tools? Things like giving the learner a clear set of instructions that are allowing them to be able to make sense of one task and one task only, or several tasks. Maybe they are annotating them. They're annotating the things that are most important, and then there's a kind of a formative assessment at the end of this, so that it's made clear that the content was understood, was accessed, understood, and is available. So I'm going to stop here now and ask if there are any questions about that. Okay, so then I will then turn to formative and summative assessments that are in support of adolescent and adult literacy learners.
Hi, Kim.
Yes.
From X Prize. Sorry, I didn't get my question in. As we're running low on time, I wanted to be able to ask just for a culminating action item about, what would be the next steps for designing a curriculum material that would really support adult learners with equitable access as we wrap up the call.
I see. Okay. I would suggest that that there are to make use of several several tools and keep several things in mind. Number one, when you are designing for adult learners or adolescent learners who have poor literacy skills, to look at don't just look at the vocabulary, look also at the sentences, look at the phrases, make sure that there aren't inferences there that you're expecting people to be able to recognize. If you use signs, if you use pictorial images, make sure that those images are well explained in the content themselves itself, and also that they are very closely aligned with the content that you're trying to help them make connections to. That is, if you're talking about the St. Louis Arch, that you don't have just a picture of St. Louis, that you actually have a picture of the arch and maybe some arrows pointing to the critical concerns. If you are using connected text and you want to provide a definition, make sure that the learners know that the definition is in between commas so that they can know that a definition is there. And then again, make sure that if you're going to use phrases like by contrast to, and on the other hand, that you are definitely pointing out in some strategy, look for transition words that help you understand the argument that's being made, being very explicit about what they should be looking for so that they don't have to guess, that they understand all the information that is there and that you're pointing them to how to find it.
Got it. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for giving us your time, your effort, and your energy, and your great passion and enthusiasm for making sure that as we design products and solutions for adult learners, that the learner first and foremost is in mind and at the top of what we do. And I want to let everyone know on the call that we will be recording this, and we will be sharing out, and we will have more Literation Lounges coming up throughout the summer. So stay tuned for more information. And I'd like to thank everyone for your time, and our wonderful Professor Kim Gomez from UCLA. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. And I really appreciate everything. And